Every doctor said it was impossible. Permanent nerve damage. No chance of recovery. Accept it and move on. James Nolan had accepted it. For 3 years, he'd accepted it. Until that afternoon. He came home early and saw something that shouldn't have been possible. His son was standing. James stood frozen on the terrace, briefcase still in his hand. Stephen, his boy who hadn't stood in 3 years, was gripping Helen's shoulders, his legs trembling beneath him. Helen, the woman he'd hired to care for Stephen, knelt in the grass by the reflecting pool, her hands barely supporting his calves, and Stephen was standing. James couldn't move, couldn't breathe. It lasted 5 seconds, maybe less. Then Stephen's legs gave out and he collapsed into Helen's arms. Both of them were crying, laughing, holding each other like something sacred had just happened. James had spent $3 million on specialists, Harvard doctors, 12 of them. Every single one said the same thing. Stephen would never walk again. But here, right in front of him, was proof they were wrong. He should have felt joy, relief, gratitude. Instead, something cold gripped his chest. Because if this woman, someone with no medical degree, no credentials, someone he paid $18 an hour, could do what all those experts couldn't, then what did that say about every choice he'd made? Every time he'd told Stephen to accept his limitations, every time he'd chosen his company over being present, his voice came out sharp, colder than he intended. "What exactly are you doing with my son?" Helen turned, her eyes met his, calm, steady. Stephen's joy vanished, his face went pale. "Dad, But James wasn't listening. He was staring at Helen, his mind racing with liability, lawsuits, unauthorized treatment, risk. And in that moment, fear made the decision for him. Before we begin, like, subscribe, and tell me where in the world you're watching from. Because maybe you need to remember today, hope shows up in the most unexpected places. "Dad, please." "She's helping me." Stephen's voice cracked across the terrace. He reached toward Helen, his small hands trembling. James didn't look at him. His eyes stayed fixed on Helen, who stood slowly, grass stains on her knees, water from the pool edge soaking through her clothes. "Mr. Nolan, if you'd just let me explain." "I don't need explanations. I need you to pack your things." The words came out flat, final. Helen's face didn't change, but something flickered in her eyes. Not anger. Something quieter, sadness maybe, or disappointment. Stephen wheeled himself forward, his voice rising. "Dad, you don't understand. I stood. I actually stood. She's been working with me for months and I'm getting stronger and, Stephen, go inside." "No, you can't do this. She's the only one who, inside, now." The boy's face crumpled. Tears spilled down his cheeks, but he didn't move. Just sat there in his wheelchair, staring at his father like he was looking at a stranger. James forced himself to stay firm. This was for Stephen's protection. False hope was worse than no hope. He'd learned that the hard way. "Helen, I'll have your final check ready by 6. Someone will bring your things to the front." Helen nodded once. She didn't argue, didn't plead. Just looked at Stephen, her expression soft. "You did so good today," she said quietly. "Don't forget that." Then she walked past James, her steps steady, and disappeared into the house. Stephen watched her go. When she was out of sight, he turned to his father. "I hate you." The words were small, barely a whisper, but they landed like stones. Stephen spun his wheelchair around and rolled toward the house, his shoulders shaking. James stood alone by the pool, the afternoon sun warm on his face, the sound of water lapping gently against the stone edge. He'd done the right thing. He had to believe that. But dinner that night was silent. Stephen wouldn't look at him, wouldn't speak, just pushed his food around his plate until James finally told him he could go. By midnight, James sat in his study, the house dark around him. He'd called his lawyer earlier, confirmed the termination was clean, no liability, no risk. But he couldn't stop seeing it. Stephen's face when his legs held, the way Helen had barely been touching him, like she knew exactly how much support to give and when to let go. James reached for his laptop, pulled it open. He told himself he just needed to document what Helen had been doing, for legal protection, in case she tried to claim wrongful termination. But his hands hesitated over the keyboard. The security system had cameras everywhere: the pool, the terrace, the therapy room James had built 3 years ago, the one filled with expensive equipment that Stephen never used. James pulled up the footage from today, watched the moment he'd walked in on, watched Stephen stand, watched him fall, watched the joy on both their faces. Then he scrolled back. 1 day, 2 days, a week, and he kept watching. What he saw made his breath catch in his throat. James sat in the blue glow of his laptop screen, the house silent around him. He'd been watching for an hour, maybe 2. He'd lost track. The footage showed everything. Helen arriving early every morning, a notebook tucked under her arm. Helen on her lunch break, laptop open, searching through medical journals and therapy research. Helen in the pool with Stephen, guiding his legs through exercises while she counted out loud, her voice patient and steady. 1 more, Stephen. You've got this. 1 more. James watched her celebrate when Stephen moved his ankle 3 inches to the left, watched her write it down in that worn notebook, the date and time, the exact measurement, watched her high-five his son like he'd just won a championship. There was no recklessness, no guessing, just weeks and weeks of careful, methodical work. James scrolled further back, found footage from 6 months ago, Stephen barely moving at all, Helen talking to him softly, telling him stories, making him laugh even when the exercises hurt. "Your mom would be so proud of you," she'd said once, her hand resting gently on Stephen's shoulder. "She'd see how hard you're trying." Stephen had cried that day, and Helen had just held him, not saying anything, just being there. James's throat tightened. He'd been so absent, so buried in work and grief, in his own guilt, that he couldn't see what was happening right in front of him. Helen hadn't been trying to replace the specialists. She'd been doing what they never did. She'd been present. James closed the laptop, sat back in his chair. The clock on the wall read 2:47 a.m. He should go to bed, try to sleep, deal with this in the morning. But he couldn't. He stood, walked upstairs, past Stephen's room. The door was cracked open. His son was asleep. Finally, his face still streaked with dried tears. James's chest ached. He went to his own room, showered, put on jeans and a sweater, nothing fancy, nothing that screamed billionaire, just clothes. By 4 a.m., he was in his car. Helen's address was still in the employee files, a small apartment building 40 minutes outside the estate, the kind of neighborhood where people worked 2 jobs and still struggled to make rent. James parked across the street, bought 2 coffees from a corner shop that was just opening, sat in his car, and waited. The sun came up slowly, painting the sky in soft shades of pink and gold. At 6:30, the building door opened. Helen stepped out, a bag over her shoulder, heading toward the bus stop. James's hands gripped the steering wheel. This was it. He could drive away, let her go, hire someone new, someone with credentials and a clean resume, someone who wouldn't make him feel like he'd failed his son. Or he could do the hardest thing he'd done in 3 years. He could admit he was wrong. James opened the car door and stepped into the morning light. Helen saw him immediately, stopped walking. Her expression shifted, guarded, careful. James crossed the street, the 2 coffees in his hands, his heart pounding so hard he thought it might break through his chest. When he reached her, he opened his mouth to speak, but the words caught in his throat. "I was wrong." The words scraped out of James's throat like broken glass. Helen stood on the sidewalk, her bag over her shoulder, the morning sun behind her. She didn't move, just watched him. James held out one of the coffees. His hand was shaking. "I watched the footage, all of it. What you've been doing with Stephen, it's not careless, it's not reckless, it's..." His voice cracked. "It's everything I should have been doing." Helen's eyes stayed on his face, reading him, measuring. "I can't take back what I said yesterday," James continued. I can't undo firing you in front of my son, but I'm asking you, please, come back, full time, whatever terms you need. I'll sign anything. Just don't give up on him because I was too scared to believe." The street was quiet. A bus rumbled past. Somewhere a dog barked. Helen took the coffee, held it between her hands. "I'm not doing this for you, Mr. Nolan," she said finally. "I'm doing it for Stephen. I know. And if you doubt me again, if you let fear decide for you, I won't come back, not a second time." James nodded. "I understand." They drove separately through the waking city, the sun climbing higher, traffic starting to build. When they pulled into the estate, the front door opened before they even parked. Stephen. He must have been waiting by the window all night. The boy wheeled himself down the ramp so fast he nearly tipped forward. When he reached Helen, she dropped to her knees on the gravel. Stephen threw his arms around her neck and held on like she was the only solid thing left in his world. "You came back," he whispered. "You came back." "I'm here," Helen said softly. "I'm not going anywhere." James stood by his car, watching his son cling to the woman who'd done what he couldn't. His throat burned. The household staff had gathered by the door, cook, gardener, housekeeper, all of them watching. Some smiled, some wiped their eyes. They'd seen what James had missed. That afternoon, James did something he hadn't done in 3 years. He canceled his meetings, all of them. He sat by the pool and watched Helen work with Stephen. Really watched, saw the way she counted each movement, encouraged every effort, celebrated the smallest progress. "Does it hurt?" James asked Stephen during a break. Stephen looked surprised his father was even there. "A little, but it's a good hurt. Like something's waking up." James's chest tightened. Later, as the sun started to set, Stephen looked up at his father. His voice was small, scared. "Dad, you're not going to send her away again, are you?" James knelt beside the wheelchair. "No, I promise. You promised Mom you'd always be here too. And then you weren't." The words hit like a fist. James opened his mouth, closed it. He had no defense. "I know," he said finally. "But I'm here now, and I'm learning. Helen's teaching me too." Stephen studied his father's face, then nodded, just a little. That night, James made a call. Dr. Patricia Chen, a specialist he'd worked with years ago on a company case, someone who could provide medical oversight, protect what Helen was building. When he told Helen the next morning, she stiffened. "I'm not trying to replace you," James said quickly. "I'm trying to protect you. If this works, when this works, I want it documented by someone the medical world respects." Helen was quiet for a long moment. Then she nodded. "All right." But neither of them saw the black sedan that pulled up to the estate gates that afternoon, or the man inside taking photos. Richard Strauss sat in his downtown office, reviewing the images his investigator had sent. Helen Grant with the boy, James Nolan watching them, all of it looking very, cozy. Richard leaned back in his leather chair and smiled. "Time to see what this woman's really made of," he murmured. He picked up his phone and made a call. 3 weeks passed. James started coming home earlier, not just on time, early. He'd sit by the pool during Stephen's sessions, asking questions, learning the names of exercises he'd never cared about before. Helen was patient with him, showed him how to spot Stephen during balance work, taught him which stretches helped and which ones pushed too hard. "Support here," she'd say, guiding James's hands to Stephen's lower back. Not lifting, just steadying. Let him do the work. James watched his hands that signed billion-dollar contracts, tremble as they touched his son's back. Such a simple thing, but he'd forgotten how. Stephen was getting stronger. 10 seconds of standing became 15, then 20. His legs didn't shake as much. His smile came easier. One afternoon, Stephen looked up at his father during a break. "You're here a lot now." James set down his phone. "Is that okay?" "Yeah." Stephen's voice was quiet. I'm not used to it." The words stung, but they were true. I'm sorry, James said. For all the time I wasn't. Stephen looked down at his hands. Mom used to say you were busy saving the world. That's why you couldn't be home. James's throat closed. Your mom was kinder than I deserved. Do you miss her? Every day. Me too. Stephen's eyes filled. Sometimes I forget what her voice sounded like. Is that bad? James pulled his son close. No, that's not bad. That's just what time does. It doesn't mean you loved her less. They sat like that for a while, the afternoon sun warm on their shoulders, the pool water lapping softly against the stone. Helen watched from across the terrace, giving them space. But when James looked up and met her eyes, something passed between them. Understanding, maybe, or gratitude. That evening, Dr. Chen came for her weekly visit. She reviewed Helen's notes, watched video documentation of Stephen's progress, ran her own assessments. This is remarkable, she said, looking between Helen and James. Truly remarkable. I'll be presenting your methods at a conference next month, Helen, with your permission. Helen hesitated. I don't know if that's... The medical community needs to see this, Dr. Chen insisted. What you're accomplishing here could help so many families. James noticed Helen's discomfort but didn't understand it. Not yet. After Dr. Chen left, Helen was quieter than usual, distant. What's wrong? James asked. Helen shook her head. Nothing, just tired. But that night, as she walked to her car, she noticed something. A man, sitting in a sedan across the street, camera in his lap. When he saw her looking, he started the engine and drove away. Helen stood in the driveway, her keys in her hand, her heart beating faster. She told herself she was being paranoid. But the next morning, when she arrived at the estate, there were 3 missed calls on her phone, all from the state medical board. Helen stared at her phone. 3 missed calls, 2 voicemails, 1 email with a subject line that made her stomach drop. Formal inquiry, unlicensed medical practice. She sat in her car in the estate driveway, hands shaking, reading the email twice, then 3 times. Someone had filed a complaint, anonymous, claiming she was practicing physical therapy without a license, claiming she was endangering a child. The medical board wanted to interview her, wanted documentation, wanted to know exactly what she'd been doing with Stephen Nolan. Helen closed her eyes and breathed. She'd been careful, so careful. Everything she did was based on research, adapted from legitimate therapeutic methods. Dr. Chen had reviewed it all, said it was sound. But sound didn't matter if someone wanted to destroy her. She got out of the car, walked toward the house, tried to keep her face calm. Stephen was waiting by the door, grinning. Helen, Dad said we could do pool work today, can we? Please. She smiled, forced herself to smile. Of course. But James saw it immediately. He'd gotten good at reading her these past few weeks, the small shifts in her expression, the way her shoulders tensed when something was wrong. Stephen, go get changed, James said. We'll meet you out back. When the boy wheeled away, James turned to Helen. What happened? Nothing. I'm fine. Helen, she met his eyes, and something in his face, the concern, the steadiness, broke through her walls. The medical board called. Someone filed a complaint against me. James went very still. What kind of complaint? Practicing without a license, endangering a child. Her voice was steady, but her hands weren't. They want to interview me, review everything I've been doing with Stephen. James's jaw tightened. Who would... He stopped, thought, how would anyone even know what you're doing here? Helen remembered the man with the camera, the sedan that sped away when she looked. I don't know, she said quietly, but someone's been watching. James pulled out his phone. I'm calling my lawyers right now. Mr. Nolan, James, and this isn't negotiable. Someone's targeting you because of my son. That makes it my problem. Helen wanted to argue, but the relief she felt was stronger than her pride. That afternoon, while Stephen practiced in the pool, James made calls. Lawyer after lawyer. his voice sharp, commanding, protective in a way Helen had never heard. Stephen didn't notice the tension. He was too focused on his progress, too happy that both his father and Helen were there. "Watch this," he called out, gripping the pool edge. He pulled himself up, legs steadying beneath him, and stood for 30 full seconds. Helen and James both clapped, but their smiles didn't quite reach their eyes. Later, after Stephen went inside to rest, James's lawyer called back. James stepped away to take it. Helen watched his face change as he listened, watched his expression go from concern to something darker. When he hung up, he stood there for a moment, staring at nothing. "What is it?" Helen asked. James turned to her. "My lawyer did some digging. The complaint came from someone with connections to Nolan Industries." Helen's stomach dropped. "What does that mean?" "It means this isn't about you." His phone buzzed. A text message. He looked at the screen and his face went pale. "It's about me." The text message was simple. 3 words. "We need to talk." It was from Richard Strauss, James's business partner of 15 years. James stared at the screen, his mind racing. Richard. Of course it was Richard. "What does it say?" Helen asked. James showed her. Helen's face went pale. "Why would your business partner file a complaint against me?" "I don't know yet, but I'm going to find out." That evening, after Stephen went to bed, James drove to Richard's house. A sprawling estate not unlike his own, all white stone and manicured lawns. Richard answered the door himself, smiled like they were old friends meeting for drinks. "James, come in." They sat in Richard's study. Leather chairs, expensive scotch, the kind of room where deals were made and lives were changed. "You filed a complaint against Helen Grant," James said. No preamble, no pleasantries. Richard's smile didn't falter. "I was concerned. For you. For Stephen. Concerned." "James, listen to yourself. You've been spending all your time at home, missing board meetings, canceling investor calls. The merger vote is in 6 weeks, and you're nowhere to be found." "My son is walking again. Because of an unlicensed caregiver using God knows what methods." Richard leaned forward. "What happens when he gets hurt? When she pushes too far and something breaks? You'll be ruined. The company will be ruined. Dr. Chen has reviewed everything. Helen's methods are sound." "Dr. Chen isn't on the board. The board is asking questions, James, about your priorities, about your judgment." James set down his glass. "You're threatening me." "I'm protecting you and the company. Step back from this distraction. Put Stephen in a proper facility with licensed professionals and focus on what matters." "My son matters." "Your son will be fine. But if you lose this company, if you lose everything you and I built, what kind of father does that make you?" James stood. The kind who finally shows up. He walked out without looking back. But as he drove home, Richard's words circled in his mind. The merger. The board. The company he'd spent 20 years building. Could he really risk it all? When he got home, Helen was still awake, sitting in the kitchen with tea. "What did he say?" she asked. James told her. All of it. Helen was quiet for a long time. Then she set down her cup. "Maybe he's right." James looked at her. "What?" "Maybe I should step back just until the merger is done. You can hire someone licensed, someone who—" "No. Mr. Nolan, James, and no, I'm not letting him win." Helen's eyes filled. "This isn't about winning. This is about Stephen and you. If you lose your company because of me, then I lose it. But I don't lose my son. Not again." The words hung between them. Helen looked at him like she was seeing him for the first time. Before either of them could speak, James's phone buzzed. An email from an unknown sender. He opened it, read it, and his blood went cold. It was a photograph. Helen and Stephen by the pool. Intimate, close. The angle made it look wrong, like something it wasn't. Below the photo, a single line of text. "Imagine what the media could do with this." Helen stared at the photo on James's phone, her hand on Stephen's shoulder, the boy looking up at her with complete trust. The angle twisted it into something ugly, something wrong. "He's going to destroy me," she whispered. James's grip tightened on the phone. "He's trying to scare us." "It's working." The kitchen felt too small, too quiet. Helen stood, moved to the window, stared out at the dark estate grounds. "I should leave," she said, "before this gets worse, before he hurts Stephen with this." "Helen, look at that photo, Mr. Nolan. Look at what he's turning this into. If that gets out, if people see it and think—" Her voice cracked. "I can't do that to Stephen. I won't." James stood, crossed the kitchen, stood beside her at the window. "3 weeks ago, I fired you because I was afraid," he said quietly. "Afraid of hope, afraid of change, afraid of admitting I'd failed my son." He turned to look at her. "I'm not making that mistake again. This is different. This is your company, your reputation, everything you've built. I built a company. You're rebuilding my son. There's no comparison." Helen's eyes filled. "You don't understand what men like Richard can do. I've seen it before. People like me, we're easy targets. No money, no lawyers, no protection. He'll make me look like—" "You're not alone in this." The words settled between them like a promise. Helen wanted to believe him, but belief was dangerous. Belief got you hurt. That night, James couldn't sleep. He lay in bed staring at the ceiling, thinking about Richard's threat, about the merger, about Stephen's face when he stood for 30 seconds today. His phone buzzed. A text from his head of security. "Found something. Need to show you. Tomorrow morning." James sat up, read it again. Whatever his security team had found, it was enough to wait until morning. Enough to document carefully. Hope stirred in his chest, small, fragile, but there. Down the hall, Stephen lay awake too. He'd heard voices earlier, his father and Helen in the kitchen. He couldn't hear the words, but he knew the tone. Something was wrong. Stephen reached for his phone on the nightstand, pulled up the family calendar his father kept, saw the entry for next week. Board merger meeting, final vote. He didn't understand all of it, but he understood enough. His father was in trouble, and it had something to do with Helen. Stephen looked at his legs under the blanket, thought about how far he'd come, how much stronger he felt. Maybe there was something he could do. In the guest house, Helen sat on the edge of her bed, the threatening photo still burned into her mind. She'd been here before. Different city, different family, different accusations, but the same ending. People like her didn't win against people like Richard Strauss. She pulled out her phone, started typing a resignation letter to James. "Dear Mr. Nolan." Her fingers hovered over the keys. Then she thought of Stephen's face today, the pure joy when he stood for 30 seconds. She deleted the letter. Whatever was coming, she'd face it. For him. Across town, in his office lit only by a desk lamp, Richard Strauss reviewed his plan. The photo was just the beginning. He had more, so much more. Anonymous tips to tabloid bloggers, contact information for concerned board members, a timeline for maximum damage. By the time he was done, James Nolan would be begging to step down as CEO. And that unlicensed caregiver? She'd never work again. Richard smiled and reached for his phone. Time to make the next move. James's security chief arrived at dawn. He spread documents across the dining room table, photos, bank records, phone logs. "Richard Strauss hired a private investigator 3 weeks ago," he said. "The same day Dr. Chen first visited. He's been tracking Helen's movements, Stephen's therapy sessions, your schedule." James stared at the evidence. "Why?" "The merger. If it goes through as planned, you remain CEO. But there's a clause. If the board votes no confidence in your leadership, Richard takes over. He's been building a case that you're distracted." Unfit. Helen stood in the doorway, listening. Her hands were shaking. "There's more," the security chief continued. He pulled out a recording device. "Richard's assistant came forward yesterday, said she couldn't stay silent anymore. She recorded this conversation." He pressed play. Richard's voice filled the room, cold, calculating. James is so busy playing house with that woman and his crippled son, he can't see I'm positioning myself to take everything. The board already has doubts. One more push, and he's done. James's face went white. The recording continued. Get me everything on Helen Grant, every job she's been fired from, every family that let her go. I need her to look dangerous, unqualified, like someone who manipulates vulnerable families. Helen's breath caught. And if that doesn't work, the assistant's voice asked, then we make sure the photo I sent him ends up everywhere. Let the media decide what it means. By the time he fights back, the damage will be done. The recording stopped. Silence filled the room. James looked at Helen, saw the pain in her eyes, the fear. He was never going to stop, she whispered, no matter what I did. No, James said. He wasn't. He stood. His expression had changed. No more fear, no more doubt. The board meeting is in 3 days, he said. Richard's going to present his case, try to force me out. What are you going to do? Helen asked. James looked at the evidence spread across the table, then at Helen, then toward the stairs where Stephen was still sleeping. I'm going to show them the truth. That afternoon, James made calls, not to lawyers this time, to board members, trusted ones, people who'd known him for years. He told them everything, the investigation, the threats, Richard's plan. I'm asking you to trust me, he said. One more time. Come to the meeting, hear what I have to say, and then decide. That evening, Stephen wheeled into his father's study. Dad, James looked up from his laptop. I want to come to your meeting, Stephen said. Stephen, it's not, I know what's happening. I heard you and Helen talking. Mr. Strauss is trying to hurt you because of me, because of her. James started to argue, but Stephen's face stopped him. I'm not a baby, Dad, and I'm not helpless. Not anymore. Stephen's voice was stronger than James had heard in years. Helen helped me stand. You helped me believe I could. Now let me help you. James stared at his son, saw the determination there, the courage. Okay, he said quietly. Okay. 2 days later, James received one final message from Richard. See you at the board meeting. Hope you've made your peace with losing everything. James deleted it. He'd already lost everything once. The day his wife died and his son stopped believing in himself, he wasn't losing anything ever again. The morning of the board meeting, James stood in front of the mirror, adjusting his tie. Helen appeared in the doorway. Ready? She asked. James turned, looked at her. This woman who'd walked into his life and changed everything. Thank you, he said, for not giving up on him, on us. Helen's eyes filled. Thank you for coming back. Downstairs, Stephen waited in his wheelchair, dressed in his best clothes. The three of them drove to Nolan Industries headquarters together. As they walked into the building, James felt something he hadn't felt in years. Hope. The boardroom doors opened, and Richard Strauss was already waiting. The boardroom was silent. 23 board members, attorneys, executives, all watching as Richard stood at the head of the table, his presentation ready. Thank you all for coming, Richard began, his voice smooth. I know this is uncomfortable, but leadership demands difficult conversations. He pulled up a slide. Photos of James leaving work early, calendar entries showing missed meetings. James Nolan has been my partner for 15 years, but in recent months his focus has shifted. Personal matters have consumed his attention during the most critical merger in our company's history. James sat quietly, Helen beside him, Stephen's wheelchair at the end of the table. Richard continued. I have evidence of household staff overstepping boundaries, unlicensed medical treatment, a pattern of judgment that puts both his family and this company at risk. He pulled up the photo, Helen and Stephen by the pool. The angle still twisted, still ugly. Several board members shifted uncomfortably. I'm not questioning James's love for his son, Richard said. I'm questioning whether personal crisis should dictate corporate leadership. He sat down, looking satisfied. James stood slowly. Thank you, Richard, for showing everyone exactly who you are. He nodded to his attorney, who began distributing folders to each board member. Inside, you'll find bank records showing Richard hired a private investigator to stalk my son's caregiver, phone logs proving he filed a false complaint with the medical board, and recordings, provided by his own assistant, of Richard planning to manufacture evidence against me. The room went still. James played the recording. Richard's voice filled the boardroom, cold, calculating, admitting everything. When it finished, the silence was deafening. Richard's face had gone pale. "This is... You can't." "I can. And I am." James's voice was steel. "You didn't just come after me, Richard. You came after my son. You tried to destroy a woman whose only crime was helping a child walk again." He turned to the board. Helen Grant accomplished what 12 specialists couldn't. Not through recklessness, through patience, research, belief. Dr. Patricia Chen has documented everything. It's all in your folders. James paused, then gestured to Stephen. "But you don't have to take my word for it." Stephen gripped the armrests of his wheelchair. His hands were shaking, but his face was set with determination. Helen moved to his side, but Stephen shook his head. "I want to try alone." The room held its breath. Stephen pushed himself up. His legs trembled, but they held. And then, step by step, he walked. 12 deliberate steps across the boardroom floor to where his father stood. Someone gasped. Another board member wiped her eyes. When Stephen reached James, his father's arms went around him, holding him steady. "Helen didn't just help me walk," Stephen said, his young voice clear in the silent room. "She helped my dad remember how to be my dad." James's eyes closed. His son's words landed in a place he didn't know was still broken. The board voted immediately. Richard was removed, not just from merger leadership, from the company entirely. He left without a word, his face twisted with fury. 3 months later, the Helen Grant Foundation opened its doors, a building downtown filled with light and hope, free therapy for families who'd been told impossible. At the ribbon cutting, Stephen walked across the stage, no assistance, no help, and handed his father the scissors. The crowd erupted in applause. But the moment James would remember forever came that evening. They sat by the reflecting pool, the three of them, Stephen's legs dangling in the water, strong enough now to kick gently. "You know what I was thinking about today?" Stephen asked. "What?" James said. "Mom. I think she would have liked Helen." Helen's breath caught. James looked at her, saw the tears in her eyes. "Yeah," he said softly. "She would have." Stephen smiled, leaned his head against his father's shoulder. And in that moment, sitting by the water where everything changed, James understood something he'd missed for so long. Grace doesn't always announce itself. Sometimes it shows up quiet, steady, in the form of a woman who believed when no one else would. Sometimes it shows up in a son who forgives. Sometimes it shows up in a second chance you don't deserve but receive anyway. Helen reached over, squeezed James's hand once. He squeezed back. And in the fading light, they sat together, not as employer and employee, not as broken people trying to fix each other, but as family, the kind that doesn't come from blood, the kind that comes from showing up, from believing, from refusing to let fear win, the kind worth fighting for.
When the billionaire walked in and saw what his nanny was doing with his twins, everything he believed about love shattered. Nicholas Smith stood frozen in the doorway of his own home, his breath caught somewhere between shock and something he couldn't name. He had come home early, something he never did. And what he saw in that moment, in the middle of his living room floor, stopped his entire world. Angela Harris, the nanny he'd hired 3 weeks ago, was kneeling between his children. Ethan and Isabel, his 3-year-old twins, were walking. Not just walking, they were walking toward each other, their small hands reaching, their faces lit with something Nicholas hadn't seen in 3 years. Joy. And then they laughed. That sound pure, bright, innocent, cut through Nicholas like a blade, because he had never heard it before, not once, not in all the time he'd been their father. He stood there, invisible in his own home, watching a stranger unlock something in his children that he didn't even know existed. And in that moment, Nicholas realized something that would break him completely. 3 years ago, Nicholas Smith's world ended in a hospital room. His wife, Caroline, died just hours after giving birth to their twins Ethan and Isabel, born premature, fragile, both diagnosed with Down syndrome. The doctors said, "They'll need twice the love, twice the patience," but all Nicholas heard was the silence where Caroline's heartbeat used to be. He became a father and a widower in the same breath. And the guilt. The guilt was unbearable. Every time he looked at his children, he saw her, the life that was taken to give them life, the love he had lost, the future that died with her. So he did what broken people do when the pain becomes too much. He ran. Not physically. He stayed in the same penthouse overlooking Central Park. He went through the motions, but emotionally, he disappeared. He buried himself in work, in meetings, in deals that took him everywhere except where he was needed most. Home. The penthouse became a tomb, silent, cold, empty. 13 nannies came and went. Each one left with the same words. "They're too difficult. I can't do this. This isn't what I expected." And every time, Nicholas would write a check, close the door, and tell himself it wasn't his fault. But deep down, he wondered if the problem wasn't his children. Maybe it was him. Then one November morning, a woman named Angela Harris walked through his door. She wasn't polished. She didn't promise miracles. She just looked him in the eye and said, "I can't promise they'll be easy, Mr. Smith, but I can promise I won't give up on them." Nicholas hired her out of desperation. He didn't believe her. He didn't believe anyone anymore. But 3 weeks later, on an ordinary afternoon when Nicholas came home early for the first time in years, he walked into his living room and saw something that would change everything. Angela was on the floor with his twins, and they were walking toward each other, laughing. Nicholas stood there, frozen, as the world he'd built around his grief began to crack, because in that single sacred moment, he realized something he'd been too afraid to see. Love had been here all along. He'd just been too broken to look. But now, standing in the doorway of his own life, Nicholas understood something deeper, something terrifying, something that would either destroy him or save him. He had a choice. He could keep hiding, or he could finally step through that door and learn what it really meant to be a father. But before we continue, I need you to do something. Click subscribe, like this video, and tell me where in the world are you watching from, because this story isn't just about Nicholas and his twins. It's about all of us. It's about the moments we miss because we're too afraid to stay. It's about the love we walk away from because the pain feels safer than the healing. Sometimes God doesn't fix your life all at once. He sends someone, a stranger, a quiet presence, a gentle soul who reminds you that your heart can still beat, that your life can still be beautiful. If this story touches something in you, don't keep it to yourself. Share it. Let someone else believe again. Let someone else know they're not alone. Now, let me tell you how it all began. Nicholas Smith had forgotten what silence sounded like until it became the only language his home knew. The penthouse stretched 40 floors above Central Park, wrapped in glass and steel, designed to make a man feel like he'd conquered the world. But conquering the world meant nothing when you couldn't face the 2 small people living in the room down the hall. Every morning began the same way. Nicholas woke at 5:30 a.m., dressed in the dark, and left for the office before the twins stirred. He told himself it was discipline, routine, the habits of a successful man. But the truth was simpler and far more painful. He was running. 3 years, 1,095 days since Caroline died. Since the doctor had placed 2 tiny, fragile infants in his arms and said, "They'll need you now more than ever." Nicholas had looked down at Ethan and Isabel, their eyes barely open, their bodies so small they fit in the crook of one arm, and all he could think was, she's gone, and they're the reason why. He hated himself for thinking it. But he couldn't stop. The penthouse became a museum of avoidance. Rooms he didn't enter, doors he didn't open, meals he didn't share. He hired nannies one after another, hoping someone else could fill the space he refused to occupy. But they all left eventually. each one with the same exhausted resignation in their eyes. "They're too demanding, Mr. Smith. I'm not trained for this level of need. I think you need someone with more experience." Nicholas would nod, write the check, close the door, and return to his office, where spreadsheets didn't need him to feel anything, and conference calls didn't ask him to be present. By the time Ethan and Isabel turned 3, they had stopped reaching for him. They didn't cry when he walked past their rooms. They didn't look up when he stood in doorways, watching from a distance like a man observing his own life through glass. Ethan would rock gently in the corner, hands flapping when he was overwhelmed, his eyes focused on something Nicholas couldn't see. Isabel would hum a soft, repetitive sound that filled the silence, but never broke it. The developmental pediatrician had been kind but direct. "Children with Down syndrome thrive on connection, Mr. Smith. Consistency. They need to know someone is there. Not just physically, but emotionally." Nicholas had nodded, thanked her, and done nothing. Because how could he give them something he didn't have anymore? The night before Angela arrived, Nicholas stood in the hallway outside the twins' bedroom, his hand resting on the doorframe. Inside, the 13th nanny, a woman named Claire, was packing her things, her movements sharp with frustration. "I'm sorry," she said, not meeting his eyes, "but I can't do this anymore. They don't respond. They don't engage. It's like trying to reach through a wall." Nicholas watched Ethan rocking in the corner, Isabel staring blankly at the wall, and he felt something crack inside his chest. They don't smile anymore. The thought whispered through him like a ghost. Had they ever? He couldn't remember. He'd been so consumed by his own grief that he'd never stopped to notice theirs. That night, after Claire left, Nicholas sat alone in his office, the city glittering below like 1,000 tiny, unreachable stars. His laptop was open to another nanny agency website. Another round of interviews, another stranger to bring into his children's lives while he continued to hide. He was so tired. Tired of running, tired of pretending, tired of living in a house that felt more like a mausoleum than a home. But he didn't know how to stop. So he scheduled another interview, typed out another job posting, and told himself like he had 1,000 times before that this time would be different. He didn't believe it. He didn't believe anything anymore. But the next morning, when Angela Harris walked through his door, something shifted. He didn't know it yet. But his life, the life he'd been hiding from for 3 years, was about to begin again. The morning Angela Harris walked through his door, Nicholas barely looked up from his phone. He was standing by the window, scrolling through emails, half listening to the sounds of the city waking up below. Another interview, another candidate, another person who would promise to stay and leave within a month. He'd stopped hoping weeks ago. "Mr. Smith?" Her voice was quiet, steady, not trying to impress him or fill the silence with nervous energy. Nicholas turned. The woman standing in his doorway wasn't what he expected. No tailored blazer, no leather portfolio, no polished smile practiced in front of a mirror. She wore simple scrubs, faded blue, like she'd come straight from a hospital shift, and carried a worn backpack slung over one shoulder. Her hair was natural, pulled back in a low bun, and her eyes were calm, clear, like she'd already seen the worst of life and decided it wasn't going to break her. "Angela Harris," she said, extending her hand. Nicholas shook it briefly. Her grip was firm, warm. "Have a seat," he said, gesturing to the chair across from his desk. She sat, folding her hands in her lap, waiting. Nicholas pulled up her resume on his tablet, thin, compared to the others. A few years working with special needs children at a community center, some volunteer work, no fancy certifications, no letters of recommendation from elite families. "You don't have much experience with private care," he said, more statement than question. "No, sir," Angela replied, "but I have experience with children who need someone to see them, not their diagnosis, not their limitations, just them." Nicholas looked up, caught off guard by the quiet certainty in her voice. "My twins are 3 years old," he said carefully. "Both have Down syndrome. They're nonverbal for the most part. They don't engage easily. The last nanny said they were—" He paused, the word bitter on his tongue. "Impossible." Angela didn't flinch, didn't look away. "Children aren't impossible, Mr. Smith," she said softly. "They're just waiting for someone who won't give up on them." The words landed harder than Nicholas expected. He cleared his throat, looking back down at the tablet. The position is Monday through Friday, 8 to 6. Weekends off. I'll provide a schedule meals, therapy appointments, routines. I expect daily updates. And I need someone who can commit, long term. I can do that, Angela said. Can you? Nicholas's voice came out sharper than he intended. Because I've hired 13 people in 3 years, and none of them lasted more than a few months. Angela met his gaze, unflinching. I can't promise they'll be easy, she said, but I can promise I won't give up on them. Nicholas studied her face, searching for the crack, the hesitation, the doubt that always appeared eventually. But all he saw was calm, resolve. He didn't believe her, but he was out of options. Fine, he said, standing. You start tomorrow. I'll have my assistant send over the paperwork. Angela rose, slinging her backpack over her shoulder. Thank you, Mr. Smith. I won't let you down. Nicholas nodded, already turning back to his phone. He didn't walk her out, didn't ask if she had questions. He just waited until he heard the front door close, then exhaled slowly, pressing his palms against the cool glass of the window. Another nanny. Another inevitable disappointment. He told himself not to hope. Hope only made it hurt more when they left. The next morning, Nicholas left for the office, at 6, as always. By the time Angela arrived at 8, he was already in his first meeting, his mind far from the penthouse and the 2 children he'd left behind. But in his office, tucked in the corner of his desk, was something he hadn't touched in weeks. The monitor. Connected to the cameras he'd installed throughout the apartment months ago. Security, he'd told himself. Standard protocol for someone in his position. But that wasn't why he'd installed them. He'd installed them because he needed to know. Needed to see if the people he hired actually cared, or if they were just counting down the hours until their paycheck cleared. Nicholas glanced at the monitor now, his finger hovering over the power button. He told himself he wouldn't check. Told himself it didn't matter. But as the morning stretched on and his meeting droned in the background, his eyes kept drifting back to that dark screen. And finally, quietly, he pressed the button. The feed blinked to life. And Nicholas leaned forward, watching, waiting, already afraid of what he might see. Nicholas told himself the cameras were for security. Standard protocol for someone in his position. A man with his wealth, his profile, his responsibilities. It made sense to monitor what happened in his home when he wasn't there. But the truth lived deeper, in the places he didn't like to look. He was afraid. Afraid that Angela would see his children the way everyone else did, as too much work, too little reward, too far from normal. Afraid that she would smile to his face and ignore them when he wasn't watching. Afraid that she would confirm what terrified him most. That Ethan and Isabel were unlovable. And if they were unlovable, what did that make him? So he watched. Not constantly, not obsessively, just often enough. Every hour or so, between meetings, he would glance at his phone, pull up the app, check the living room feed, the kitchen, the playroom. Just a quick look, 30 seconds. A minute at most. Just to make sure. The first few days, he saw what he expected. Angela, moving through the apartment with quiet efficiency, preparing meals, cleaning up toys, sitting near the twins while they played or didn't play in their separate corners of the room. Ethan rocking, Isabel humming, both of them lost in their own worlds. Angela didn't force them to engage, didn't pull them into activities they clearly didn't want. She just existed nearby, present but not pressing. Nicholas didn't know what to make of it. By the end of the first week, something small shifted. He was in a budget meeting when he pulled up the feed, barely paying attention to the numbers being discussed on the screen in front of him. On his phone, Angela was sitting cross-legged on the living room floor, a picture book open in her lap. She wasn't reading aloud. She was just turning the pages slowly, her finger tracing the illustrations, humming softly. Isabel was across the room, as usual, rocking slightly, staring at the wall. But then, so slowly, Nicholas almost missed it. Isabel turned her head, just a little, toward the sound of Angela's humming. Nicholas's breath caught. He watched Isabel's small face, the way her eyes really focused on Angela for the first time. And then, like a bird testing its wings, Isabel stood, wobbled, took one uncertain step toward Angela. Then another. Angela didn't look up, didn't react, just kept humming, turning pages, as if she'd known all along that Isabel would come. When Isabel reached her, she didn't sit. She just stood there, swaying slightly, her eyes fixed on the colorful pictures in Angela's lap. And Angela, without a word, shifted the book so Isabel could see it better. Nicholas stared at his phone, his heart pounding in his chest. Someone was speaking to him, asking him a question about quarterly projections. He had no idea what they'd said. "I'll get back to you on that," he muttered, his eyes still locked on the screen. The meeting continued around him, but Nicholas wasn't there anymore. He was watching his daughter, his silent, unreachable daughter, lean closer to a stranger and listen. By the second week, Nicholas was checking the cameras every 20 minutes. He told himself he was being cautious, responsible, but the truth was harder to swallow. He was searching for proof. Proof that Angela would fail, proof that his children were too broken, proof that he'd been right to keep his distance all along. But what he found instead was something he didn't know how to name. He saw Angela sitting with Ethan during a meltdown, not trying to stop it, not scolding him, just staying close, her hand resting lightly on his back while he rocked and cried. He saw her singing while she cooked, Isabel standing in the doorway, watching with wide, curious eyes. He saw her playing with wooden blocks on the floor, building towers and knocking them down, over and over, until Ethan finally reached out and knocked one down himself. Angela had laughed. A real, unguarded laugh. And Ethan had smiled. Nicholas had rewound that moment 3 times, his throat tight, his hands trembling. He had never seen his son smile. Not once. Not for him. One afternoon, Nicholas came home early, something he never did. He stood in the hallway, listening to the sounds drifting from the living room, soft voices, a child's giggle, the shuffle of small feet. He moved quietly to the doorway and stopped. Angela was kneeling on the floor, her arms stretched wide. Ethan was on one side of the room, Isabel on the other. "Come on, Ethan," Angela said gently. "Walk to Isabel. She's waiting for you, baby." Nicholas's breath caught in his throat. Ethan took a shaky step forward, then another. Isabel mirrored him from the other side, her tiny hands reaching. And when their fingers touched in the middle, when they tumbled into Angela's arms, laughing, Nicholas felt something inside him crack wide open. He stood there, frozen in his own doorway, tears burning his eyes. And for the first time in 3 years, Nicholas Smith felt his heart beat again. Nicholas didn't sleep that night. He lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, replaying the moment over and over in his mind. The sound of his children's laughter, the way their hands had reached for each other, the light in their faces, a light he'd convinced himself didn't exist. And Angela, kneeling between them like she'd known all along what they were capable of, like she'd seen something in them he'd been too afraid to look for. The shame was suffocating. He had been 20 feet away, down the hall, behind a closed door, watching life happen on a screen instead of being part of it. And in that single moment, standing in his own doorway like a stranger, Nicholas understood something that shattered him completely. He hadn't been protecting his children by staying away. He'd been abandoning them. The next morning, he didn't leave for the office at 6. He stayed. Dressed, showered, but he stayed. He heard Angela arrive, heard her quiet greeting in the hallway, heard the twins stirring in their rooms. And instead of retreating to his office like he always did, Nicholas stood in the kitchen, gripping a cup of coffee he couldn't taste, his heart pounding like he was about to walk into battle. When Angela came in, she paused. "Good morning, Mr. Smith," she said, surprised but calm. "I didn't know you'd be home today." "I'm not staying long," Nicholas lied. "Just needed to take care of some things here." Angela nodded, moving past him to start breakfast. She didn't press, didn't ask questions, just began her routine as if he wasn't standing there, out of place in his own home. Nicholas watched her work. She moved with quiet efficiency, cracking eggs, slicing fruit, humming that same soft melody she always did. And then the twins appeared, padding into the kitchen in their pajamas, hair messy from sleep. Ethan went straight to his chair. Isabel climbed into hers, rocking slightly. Neither of them looked at Nicholas. It was like he wasn't even there. Angela set their plates in front of them, scrambled eggs, sliced strawberries, toast cut into small squares. "Good morning, babies," she said gently, brushing a hand over Isabel's hair. "Did you sleep well?" Isabel hummed in response. Ethan picked up a piece of toast, examining it closely before taking a bite. And Nicholas stood there, holding his coffee, feeling like a ghost haunting his own life. "Would you like to join us, Mr. Smith?" Angela's voice was soft, but there was something in it, something that felt like an invitation and a challenge at the same time. Nicholas hesitated. Every instinct told him to leave, to retreat to his office where he was safe, where he didn't have to face the distance between him and his children, where he didn't have to feel. But he thought about yesterday, the laughter, the reaching, the moment he'd missed because he'd been hiding. "Yeah," he said quietly, "I'd like that." He sat at the table, stiff, uncertain, his hands wrapped around his coffee cup like a lifeline. The twins didn't acknowledge him, didn't look up. They just ate, lost in their own rhythms, while Angela moved between the counter and the table, refilling juice, wiping sticky fingers. Nicholas opened his mouth to say something, anything, but no words came. What could he say? "I'm sorry I've been gone. I'm sorry I didn't know you could laugh. I'm sorry I've been too broken to be your father." Angela glanced at him, her expression kind but unreadable. "It takes time," she said softly, as if she could hear the thoughts screaming in his head. "They don't know you yet, but they will, if you let them." Nicholas swallowed hard, his throat tight. "I don't know how," he admitted, his voice barely above a whisper. Angela paused, setting down the dishcloth she'd been holding. She looked at him, really looked at him, and for the first time, Nicholas didn't try to hide. "You start by being here," she said. "Not watching, not planning, just here, present. That's where it begins." Nicholas nodded, tears burning behind his eyes. Across the table, Ethan dropped his toast. It tumbled off his plate, landing on the floor. Before Nicholas could think, before fear could stop him, he stood, picked up the toast, and handed it back to his son. Ethan took it. Their eyes met for half a second, and then Ethan looked away. But Nicholas had seen it. That flicker of recognition, that tiny, fragile bridge beginning to form. It wasn't much, but it was something. And for the first time in 3 years, Nicholas allowed himself to hope. Nicholas thought he'd finally found sleep when the sound woke him. Soft, distant, a melody he couldn't quite place, drifting through the penthouse like something from a dream. He blinked in the darkness, disoriented. The clock on his nightstand read 2:47 A. For a moment, he thought he'd imagined it, but then he heard it again, humming. Nicholas sat up, his heart beginning to race. He threw on a shirt and stepped into the hallway, following the sound down the corridor toward the twins' rooms. Isabel's door was cracked open, a soft glow spilling into the hallway. Nicholas approached slowly, carefully, like he was stepping into someone else's life. When he looked inside, his breath stopped. Angela was sitting in the rocking chair beside Isabel's bed, still wearing the same clothes she'd had on during the day. Isabel lay in her arms, small and feverish, her face flushed and damp. A cool cloth rested on the child's forehead, and Angela was gently wiping her cheeks, humming that low, steady melody. And there, on the floor at Angela's feet, was Ethan, curled up in a nest of blankets, fast asleep, refusing to leave his sister's side. Nicholas stood frozen in the doorway, the scene before him so tender it hurt to witness. Angela glanced up, noticing him. She didn't startle, didn't apologize. She just gave him a small, tired nod. Her fever spiked around midnight, Angela whispered. "I called Dr. Morrison. He said to keep her cool and comfortable. It's breaking now. She'll be okay." Nicholas's throat tightened. You stayed," he managed. Angela looked back down at Isabel, brushing a curl away from the child's damp forehead. "Of course I stayed," she said softly. "But your shift," Nicholas's voice cracked. "You were off at 6. It's almost 3 in the morning." Angela didn't answer right away. She just kept rocking, kept humming, kept holding his daughter like she was the most precious thing in the world. They needed someone, she finally said. I couldn't leave them alone, not when they were scared. The word struck Nicholas like a blow to the chest. They needed someone, and he hadn't been there. He hadn't even known. He stood in the doorway, his hands trembling, watching this woman, this stranger he'd hired 3 weeks ago, do what he should have been doing all along. You didn't have to stay, Nicholas whispered, barely able to get the words out. Angela looked up at him then, and in her eyes he saw something that cut deeper than anger ever could. Compassion. Yes, I did, she said gently. They're not just a job, Mr. Smith. They're children who need to know that when they're hurting, someone will be there. Someone will stay. Nicholas felt his knees weaken. He braced himself against the doorframe, tears burning hot behind his eyes. I didn't know she was sick, he said, his voice breaking. I didn't hear her. I didn't. I know, Angela said quietly, but you're here now. Nicholas looked at his daughter, pale and small in Angela's arms. He looked at his son, curled protectively on the floor beside them, and he realized, with a clarity that shattered him, that this was what love looked like. Not grand gestures, not expensive gifts or carefully curated schedules. Just this. Staying. Being there when it was hard, when it was messy, when there was no applause, no recognition, no reward except the knowledge that a child wasn't alone in their fear. Angela had made that choice without hesitation. And Nicholas. He had been asleep down the hall, completely unaware that his children were suffering. Can I? His voice broke. He tried again. Can I do anything? Angela's expression softened. You can sit with Ethan, she said. I think he'd like to know his father is here. Nicholas nodded, unable to speak. He crossed the room slowly, his movements uncertain, and lowered himself to the floor beside his son. Ethan stirred slightly, his small face relaxed in sleep. Nicholas reached out, his hand hovering over Ethan's back, afraid to touch him, afraid he didn't have the right. But then he remembered Angela's words. You start by being here. So Nicholas placed his hand gently on his son's shoulder. Ethan didn't wake, but he settled deeper into sleep, as if some part of him knew. His father was finally there. Nicholas sat on that floor until dawn broke through the windows, his hand never leaving his son's back, tears streaming silently down his face. And across the room, Angela continued to rock Isabel, humming softly, her eyes heavy with exhaustion, but filled with something Nicholas had forgotten existed. Grace. The kind of grace that doesn't give up. The kind that stays. 6 weeks after Angela started, guilt became heavier than fear. Nicholas had been carrying it like a stone in his chest, growing larger, sharper, impossible to ignore. Every time he looked at Angela with his children, every time he saw the trust in her eyes, the weight pressed harder. She didn't know. She didn't know he'd been watching her, studying her, recording her every move like she was a suspect instead of a savior. And the longer he waited, the worse it became. One evening, after the twins were asleep, Nicholas found Angela in the kitchen, wiping down the counters, preparing to leave for the night. Angela, he said, his voice rougher than he intended, can you stay? Just for a few minutes. I need to. I need to tell you something. She looked up, concern flickering across her face. Of course. They sat at the kitchen table, the city lights glowing softly through the windows. Nicholas's coffee sat untouched between them, growing cold. He didn't know how to start. Didn't know how to explain the fear that had driven him to violate her privacy, her trust, everything she'd given so freely. I installed cameras, he finally said, the words falling out like broken glass. Throughout the penthouse, in the living room, the playroom, the kitchen. I've been watching you, every day, since you started. Angela went still. Nicholas forced himself to continue, his hands trembling. I told myself it was for security, for the twins' safety, but that wasn't it. His voice cracked. I didn't trust you. I thought you might hurt them, or ignore them, or leave like everyone else. I thought I needed proof that you were. He couldn't finish. The silence stretched between them, thick and suffocating. Nicholas braced himself for the anger, the betrayal, the resignation letter he deserved. But when Angela finally spoke, her voice was quiet, almost sad. I know. Nicholas's head snapped up. What? I know about the cameras, Angela said, meeting his eyes. I noticed them the second day. The one above the bookshelf blinks red every 30 seconds when it's recording. Nicholas felt the air leave his lungs. You knew. His voice was barely a whisper. This whole time, you knew I was spying on you, and you stayed. Angela folded her hands on the table, her expression calm but weighed with something deeper. I figured you needed to see it for yourself, she said softly. That they're worth loving, that you're capable of loving them. The words cut through Nicholas like a blade. I don't understand, he said, his voice breaking. Why didn't you leave? Why didn't you confront me? I violated your privacy. I treated you like someone who was afraid, Angela finished gently. And you were. You are. Nicholas pressed his palms against his eyes, trying to hold himself together, but the dam was breaking. I don't know how to be their father, he choked out. I look at them and all I see is her, Caroline. Everything I lost, everything I failed to protect. The doctors said they'd need twice the love, and God, Angela, I don't even know if I have any left to give. Yes, you do, Angela said, her voice steady and sure. I've seen it, in the way you stand in doorways watching them, in the way your hands shake when you get close, in the way you torture yourself with cameras because you're so terrified of failing them again. Nicholas dropped his hands, tears streaming down his face. Then teach me, he whispered. Please, teach me how to do this. I can't keep running. I can't keep hiding behind screens and closed doors. I want to be their father. I don't know how. Angela reached across the table, her hand covering his. It was the first time she'd ever touched him. You don't need lessons, Nicholas, she said, using his first name for the first time. You don't need to be perfect. You just need to be there. Let them see you. Let them know you. That's where it starts. That's where love begins. A sound broke the moment, small, tentative. They both turned. Ethan stood in the doorway clutching his stuffed bear, his eyes wide and sleepy. Nicholas's heart stopped. For 3 years, he'd avoided this exact moment, being needed, being seen. But now, looking at his son standing there in the dim light, Nicholas felt something shift inside him. He stood slowly, walked toward Ethan, and knelt down. Hey, buddy, he whispered, his voice shaking. Did you have a bad dream? Ethan stared at him, uncertain. And then, so quietly Nicholas almost missed it, Ethan took a step forward. Nicholas opened his arms, and when his son fell into them small and warm and real, Nicholas held on like he was holding the only thing that mattered in the world. Because he was. The next morning began differently. Nicholas didn't wake at 5:30, didn't dress in the dark, didn't leave before the world stirred. Instead, he stood in the kitchen at 7, sleeves rolled to his elbows, watching the coffee brew, his heart beating in a rhythm he didn't recognize. Nervousness, hope, fear. When Angela arrived, she found him there, holding 2 mugs, looking like a man who'd forgotten how to belong in his own home. Good morning, she said, surprise flickering across her face. Morning, Nicholas replied. His voice was steady, but his hands weren't. I thought I'd like to help today, with the twins, if that's okay. Angela set down her bag slowly, studying him. It's more than okay, she said softly. It's everything. When Ethan and Isabel shuffled into the kitchen, rubbing sleep from their eyes, Nicholas was already at the table, waiting, present. Not behind a door, not on a screen. There. Angela moved through the morning routine with quiet grace, and Nicholas followed her lead. She showed him how Ethan liked his toast cut into 4 squares, no crust. How Isabel needed her juice in the blue cup, never the red one. Small things. Details Nicholas had never known, because he'd never been close enough to learn. Can I try? Nicholas asked, his voice tentative as Angela prepared to feed Isabel her oatmeal. Angela handed him the spoon without hesitation. Nicholas sat beside his daughter, the spoon trembling slightly in his hand. Isabel looked at him, really looked at him for the first time in years. Hey, sweetheart, Nicholas whispered. Daddy's going to help you with breakfast today. Is that okay? Isabel didn't answer, just watched him with those wide, curious eyes. Nicholas lifted a small spoonful of oatmeal to her lips. She turned her head away. He tried again. She pushed his hand gently, humming in protest. Nicholas felt panic rising in his chest. He was doing it wrong. He was... "She likes it cooler," Angela said gently from across the kitchen. "Blow on it first, and let her see you taste it. She needs to trust it." Nicholas nodded, his throat tight. He blew on the oatmeal, then brought it to his own lips, tasting it. He said softly. "It's good, Isabel. I promise." He offered the spoon again. This time, Isabel leaned forward and took the bite. Nicholas exhaled a breath he didn't know he'd been holding. "Good girl," he whispered, his voice breaking. "That's my good girl." Across the table, Ethan was watching, not eating, just watching his father with an expression Nicholas couldn't read. "You want to try too, buddy?" Nicholas asked. Ethan didn't respond, but he didn't look away either. Nicholas picked up another spoon, scooped some eggs, and held it out toward his son. Ethan hesitated. Then slowly, carefully, he opened his mouth. Nicholas fed him. And when Ethan chewed and swallowed, Nicholas felt something inside his chest crack wide open. Joy. Pure, overwhelming, terrifying joy. The day unfolded slowly. Angela taught Nicholas how to brush Isabel's hair without pulling, how to button Ethan's shirt when his small fingers couldn't quite manage, how to read the signs when they were overwhelmed, when they needed space, when they were ready to try something new. Nicholas fumbled through every step. He spilled juice, got the buttons wrong, read the same page of a storybook 3 times because he kept losing his place, distracted by the weight of Isabel leaning against his side. But every mistake was met with patience. From Angela. And somehow, from his children too. By afternoon, Nicholas was exhausted in a way he'd never been before. Not the exhaustion of closing deals or managing crises. This was different, deeper. The exhaustion of being present, of caring, of trying. He sat on the living room floor, blocks scattered around him, Ethan building a tower with intense concentration. Isabel hummed nearby, rocking slightly, holding a stuffed rabbit Angela had given her weeks ago. "I don't know what I'm doing," Nicholas admitted quietly, looking up at Angela. She was standing in the doorway, watching them with an expression he couldn't quite name. "Yes, you do," she said. "You're doing exactly what they need. You're here. You're trying. That's all love is, Nicholas. Showing up. Even when you're scared. Even when you don't have all the answers." Nicholas looked down at Ethan, at the careful way his son placed each block, his tongue poking out in concentration. "I've wasted so much time," Nicholas whispered. "Then don't waste any more," Angela said gently. Ethan's tower wobbled. Fell. Blocks scattered across the floor. Nicholas waited for the meltdown, the tears, the frustration. But Ethan just looked at the fallen blocks, then looked at his father, and slowly, tentatively, pushed one block toward Nicholas. An invitation. Nicholas picked up the block, his hands shaking, and placed it carefully on the floor. Ethan added another, then another, and together father and son they began to build. Not perfectly, not easily, but together. And for the first time in 3 years, Nicholas wasn't watching life happen from a distance. He was living it. Right here. In the mess and the fumbling and the beautiful, broken beginning of something real. Angela turned away from the doorway, her eyes wet with tears she didn't want them to see. Because she'd just witnessed something sacred. A father coming home. The invitation arrived on a Tuesday afternoon. Nicholas stared at the embossed card in his hand, his brother-in-law Marcus's precise handwriting across the front. Family dinner, Saturday, 6 p.m. It's been too long. But what Marcus really meant was clear. It's time to explain yourself. Nicholas hadn't seen Caroline's family in over a year. He'd made excuses, work trips, scheduling conflicts, anything to avoid the questions in their eyes, the judgment he knew he deserved. But now, standing in his living room, watching Angela help Isabel put on her shoes while Ethan practiced counting blocks, Nicholas realized something. He wasn't the same man they remembered. And maybe it was time they knew that. "Angela," he said quietly, "would you come with us? To the dinner?" She looked up, surprised. "Mr. Smith, I don't think." "Nicholas," he corrected gently. "And I'm not asking as your employer. I'm asking because you're part of this, part of us. And I don't think I can do this without you. Angela's eyes searched his face. Then she nodded. Okay, I'll come. Caroline's parents lived in a sprawling estate in Connecticut. Old money, old traditions, old wounds that never quite healed. The moment Nicholas's car pulled up, he felt the weight of it, the expectations, the disappointment, the ghost of the woman he'd loved and lost. Marcus opened the door, his expression carefully neutral. "Nicholas," he said. Then his eyes shifted to Angela, standing beside the twins. "And company." "This is Angela Harris," Nicholas said, his voice steady. "She's been helping with Ethan and Isabel." "The nanny?" Marcus said flatly. "Yes, we've heard." The word landed like a stone. The nanny. As if that diminished everything she was, everything she'd done. Inside, the dining room was set with crystal and silver, every detail perfect, every surface cold. Caroline's mother, Diane, sat at the head of the table, her eyes red-rimmed but dry. She looked at the twins really, looked at them for the first time in over a year. "They've grown," she whispered. "They have," Nicholas said softly, guiding Ethan and Isabel to their seats. Dinner began with strained pleasantries, questions about Nicholas's business, comments about the weather, everything except what everyone was really thinking, until Marcus cleared his throat. "So, Nicholas," he said, his tone sharp, "we've been wondering when you'd finally bring the children around. It's been, what, 14 months since we last saw them?" Nicholas set down his fork. "I know, and I'm sorry. I should have." "You should have done a lot of things," Marcus interrupted. "Caroline loved her family. She would have wanted her children to know us, to be part of—" "Don't." Nicholas's voice was quiet but firm. "Don't tell me what Caroline would have wanted. I live with that every single day." The table fell silent. Isabel began to rock slightly, overwhelmed by the tension. Angela placed a gentle hand on her back, whispering something soft that only Isabel could hear. Marcus noticed. "Is this really appropriate?" he said, looking at Angela. "Having the help at a family dinner?" And something inside, Nicholas snapped. Not with anger, but with clarity. He stood slowly, his chair scraping against the hardwood floor. "Angela isn't the help," Nicholas said, his voice cutting through the silence. "She's the reason my children are thriving. She's the reason Ethan speaks now. She's the reason Isabel laughs. She stayed when 13 other people walked away. She sat up all night when Isabel had a fever. She taught me how to be a father when I'd forgotten what that meant." He looked around the table, meeting every pair of eyes. "For 3 years, I abandoned my children because I was drowning in grief, and not one person at this table, not one reached out to help. But Angela did. She showed up. She stayed. And if anyone here has a problem with her being at this table, then we'll leave. Because she belongs here more than anyone who's ever called my children difficult or looked at their diagnosis before seeing their hearts." The room was utterly still. Diane's hands trembled as she set down her glass. "I tried to call," she said, her voice breaking, "so many times. But you never answered. You shut us all out, Nicholas. We didn't know how to reach you." Nicholas felt the weight of her words. "I know," he said quietly, "and I'm sorry. I was so lost in my own pain that I couldn't see anyone else's, but I'm here now. And I'm asking if you want to know Ethan and Isabel, really know them, then I need you to see them, not their diagnosis, not what they can't do, but who they are." Diane stood slowly, tears streaming down her face. She walked around the table and knelt beside Isabel's chair. "Hello, sweetheart," she whispered. "I'm your grandma, and I've missed you so much." Isabel looked at her, humming softly. Then she reached out and touched Diane's face. Diane broke. She pulled Isabel into her arms, sobbing, years of grief and distance pouring out all at once. Nicholas felt Angela's hand slip into his beneath the table. He squeezed it, grateful, overwhelmed, finally free. Sunday morning arrived wrapped in golden autumn light, the kind that makes everything feel possible. Nicholas woke early, not out of habit, but anticipation. He could hear soft sounds drifting through the penthouse, Isabel's humming, Ethan's footsteps, Angela's gentle voice weaving through it all like music. He didn't reach for his phone, didn't check his email. He just got dressed and walked toward the sound of his family. When he entered the living room, Angela was already there, sitting cross-legged on the floor, toys arranged in a careful pattern around her. "Good morning," she said, smiling. "Morning," Nicholas replied, settling onto the floor beside her. It didn't feel strange anymore. This sitting on the floor in wrinkled clothes, hair uncombed, no agenda except being present, this felt like home. "I thought we could try something today," Angela said softly. Nicholas looked at her, curious. She positioned Ethan on one side of the room, then Isabel on the other. But this time, she didn't kneel between them. She placed Nicholas there instead. "What?" Nicholas started. "Trust me," Angela said, moving to the opposite side where Ethan had been standing. Nicholas knelt in the center, his heart pounding. Angela smiled at the twins. "Okay, babies, show Daddy what you can do." Ethan looked at Angela, then at his father, his small face serious, concentrating. "Come on, Ethan," Angela encouraged. "Go to Daddy." Ethan took one wobbling step, then another. From the other side, Isabel began moving toward Angela, her hands outstretched. But then something shifted. Ethan changed direction. He wasn't walking toward Angela anymore. He was walking toward Nicholas. Nicholas's breath caught in his throat, his vision blurring. Ethan reached him, those small, uncertain steps covering the distance between them. And when he got close enough, Ethan threw his tiny arms around Nicholas's neck and spoke. One perfect, world-shattering word. "Dada." Nicholas's world stopped. He pulled his son close, tears streaming freely down his face, his whole body shaking. "I'm here, buddy," he choked out. "Daddy's here. I'm so sorry it took me so long, but I'm here, now. I'm here." Across the room, Isabel reached Angela, grabbing onto her legs, looking up with those wide, trusting eyes. "Gigi," Isabel said clearly. Angela's hand flew to her mouth, tears spilling over. She scooped Isabel up, holding her close, laughing and crying at the same time. Nicholas looked up at Angela through his tears, still holding Ethan, and in that moment, they both understood. This wasn't employer and employee. This wasn't caregiver and parent. This was family. Broken and rebuilt, scarred and healing, imperfect and real. Nicholas reached out his hand. Angela took it, and together, with Ethan in Nicholas's arms and Isabel in Angela's, they held each other in the streaming sunlight. "Thank you," Nicholas whispered, "for not giving up on us, for showing me what love looks like when it stays." Angela smiled through her tears. "You were always worth the wait, Nicholas, all three of you." They stayed there, wrapped in each other, while the city hummed 40 stories below, and life, real, messy, beautiful life, pulsed around them. Later that afternoon, Nicholas did something he'd been planning for days. He went through the penthouse, one room at a time, and quietly removed every camera. When Angela noticed, she didn't say anything. She just watched as he carried the last monitor to his office and tucked it away in a drawer. "You don't need them anymore?" she asked softly. Nicholas shook his head. "I spent 3 years watching life happen from behind a screen," he said. "Afraid to be part of it, afraid to feel it. But I don't want to observe anymore, Angela. I want to live. I want to be here, really here, for every moment. The hard ones and the beautiful ones, the tantrums and the triumphs. All of it." Angela's eyes shimmered. "That's what they've always needed," she said. "Not a perfect father, just a present one." That evening, as the sun set over Manhattan, painting the sky in shades of amber and rose, the four of them walked through Central Park. Nicholas pushed both twins on the swings, their laughter ringing out clear and bright. Angela stood beside him, her hand brushing his, their shoulders touching. Other families played nearby, parents chasing toddlers, couples walking dogs, children shrieking with joy on the playground. And, for the first time in 3 years, Nicholas didn't feel separate from them. He was one of them. A father, flawed and learning, broken and healing, but present, finally, blessedly present. Ethan called out from the swing, "Higher, Dada!" Nicholas laughed, a real, unguarded laugh, and pushed him higher. Isabel reached for Angela, singing her humming song. And Nicholas looked at the woman beside him, this quiet miracle who'd walked into his life and reminded him what love was. "I don't know what we are anymore," he said softly. "You're not just their caregiver. You're not just—" "I don't have the right words." Angela smiled, watching the twins. "Maybe we don't need words yet," she said. "Maybe we just keep showing up, keep choosing each other, keep building this beautiful, imperfect thing together." Nicholas nodded, his throat tight with emotion. "I can do that," he whispered. "For them, for you, for the rest of my life I can do that." The sun dipped lower, casting long shadows across the park. And as they walked home together, hands connected, laughter echoing, hearts finally whole, Nicholas understood something profound. Love had been waiting for him all along. In two small faces he'd been too afraid to see. In the hands of a woman brave enough to stay. In the choice to stop running and start living. He'd spent 3 years building walls to protect himself from pain. But Angela had shown him the truth. The only way to protect your heart is to open it. And now, walking through the falling dusk with his family beside him, Nicholas finally understood. He was home. Not because of the penthouse or the city or the life he'd built, but because of them. The people who loved him even when he couldn't love himself. The people who waited. The people who stayed. And as the lights of the city began to glow against the deepening sky, Nicholas made one final promise. He would never stop showing up. Never stop choosing them. Never stop being present for every beautiful, terrifying, sacred moment of the life they were building together. Because that's what love is. Not something you find, but something you build. One moment at a time. One choice at a time. One heartbeat at a time. Forever.